Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Christina, and this is my writing channel, my AuthorTube channel. And today I'm going to do another entry into my series. It's now becoming a series called Journey of a Story. And I will create a playlist that is going to have, all of the stories basically of how I wrote and eventually published some of my stories. And Future Virtual Love kind of holds a very special place in my heart because this was the first story that I got published by people that were complete strangers to me. And it's kind of the story that I feel like kind of kicked off my now writing style and sort of the second half of my career. And what I mean by that is prior to me writing Future Virtual Love, which I wrote in 2013, I had written stories before that, of course, and I had written a novel. I'd actually written two novels, but one novel I don't really count because I wrote it in high school. But nonetheless, it was a book. um, but those were kind of just early stories and an early novel. And they did not have the style or voice that I now have now. Does that make sense? Anyway, it was sort of the beginning of this new style of writing that I had found. It was really my voice. I had been sort of honing it and working on it, but when I wrote that story, Future Virtual Love, I knew that it was gonna eventually get published. It was one of those stories that I wrote and said, yeah, this story is special. And everybody around me thought it was special. So let me set the scene for you. I was in grad school. I had been there since fall of 2011, and I had taken 3 classes, I think, by then. And so I was going into the summer of 2023 semester. And I believe the semester started in June. And so this was right around the end of May. I had finished my spring semester on kind of like a high. I had written so many things, and the stories were just coming to me one after another. And so even though I had wrapped up my spring class, it was still a few weeks before the summer class was going to start, I was like, nope, I got to write more stories. So I wrote Future Virtual Love in that sort of in between time. And it was the first story that I workshopped for the class. The class was a workshop class where basically everybody submits stories and everybody comments on them. So that story was my first story I submitted. Now, I had originally envisioned this story as 3 parts. It was the introductional part, then there was sort of a continuation of what was happening with the character in part 2, and part 3 was kind of like the global implications of what this main character has done. Future Virtual Love is about a guy named Mr. Shu who is lonely, and his wife was in a car accident in Japan, and she's in a coma. He wants to talk to her. He can't talk to her because she's in the coma, obviously, and he can't leave Japan because that's where she is. So he's kind of stuck in this limbo. He is a Chinese man who's in Japan. And I kind of had this inspiration because I had read Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World. I was thinking of like Stranger in a Strange Land, all these sort of science fictional stories where there's a character who leaves their environment and they're stuck in like this foreign, weird, un- unknown environment. And so that's how I kind of saw Mr. Shu. And so, to sort of alleviate his loneliness, he goes to these places called virtual reality dens, where you can basically rent a room and a virtual reality or an AI personality. You can tailor make to whatever it is that you want. And he goes and he makes his VR person, the AI person, into his wife. And something happens one day while he's there. And I'm not going to go into the whole story, but nonetheless, it changes his life forever. So that's what I was thinking about when I wrote this story. And I had written part one and part two. And then my grad school class started, and my turn came up to submit. And so I submitted part one and part two of my short story. It was in total probably about 5,000 words or so, maybe a little bit less, maybe 4,500, something like that. And I had an idea of how I wanted part three to go, but I never submitted part three. And the reason I didn't is because I submitted part two and everybody in the class loved it, which says a lot because my class is mostly consisted of people who wrote literary fiction. And this was a solidly science fiction story. Remember, this is 2013. This is before the metaverse. This is before AI chatbots started taking over and all this other stuff. It was way before Chat GTP, all that stuff. So, writing this distinctly science fiction story to a group of people who mostly read David Foster Wallace and a lot of other literary fiction writers, and having them enjoy it was definitely a win. And my professor kept saying, I don't think you need a part three. I think you should just submit part one. I think it's complete right there. And I said, really? Do you think so? Do you think so? And she said, yeah, but it's your story. You do what you think is best. So I thought about it and I thought about it. And then before I knew it, I had to submit something else. So I submitted a different story that I had written. And I can't think of it right now. But I did submit a second story that was not part three. And some people were like, hey, what happened to part three? And I said, I wrote it, but I don't know. Maybe I'll submit it. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Because I did write a part three. I really don't know where it is right now. But the more I looked at the story, the more I thought my professor was correct. That part one, even not even part two, but part one was a complete story in of itself. And one of the things I was learning while I was in school was that a lot of places that were publishing short stories were not publishing short stories that were longer than 2,000 words, maybe 3,000 pushing it, but most places were publishing shorter works. So your short story had to come in clocking under 2,000 words. And this short story, part one, was 1,800 words, somewhere between 1,800 and 1,900 words. So it was like just there. And so I just kept thinking, like, if everybody's telling me that part one is a complete story, then maybe I should try and get this published instead of trying to get part two and part three published along with it and just completely, you know, not being locked out of a lot of markets because they don't want to publish a 5 to 6,000 word story. So I continued to just work on part one and kind of hone it and get it good. Get it good. Rewrite it well. And then I had a private meeting with my professor at the time, and she encouraged me to start submitting. I hadn't really submitted anything. I was more focused on just honing my craft and getting better at writing. But she was like, "No, your voice is here. Your voice is here. Your talent is here. You can keep working on it and working on it. But this short story," and she was talking about future virtual love, she said, "I could see this published in the big science fiction places, Clark's World, Asimov's, whole bunch of other places." She kind of rattled them off. And I said, okay. So I decided that I would start submitting future virtual love. And it came back rejected from the first place. That class ended. I started my next class in the fall. And in that class, I also did I rework the story? I think I did. I think I submitted it through that story and still got some feedback. Everybody still liked it. But now I was just writing this short story. And I continued to revise it, tinker with it here and there, but not too much. At the end of 2013, I felt like I had a version of the story that was very good and I wanted to get it published. So I started submitting it around and it started collecting rejection letters. And I kept submitting and I kept submitting and I kept submitting. And it kept getting rejected. All these places that people had said, "Oh, I can see it in that magazine," or "Oh, I can see it there," they kept rejecting me, and or they ghosted me. Pretty much the gambit happened. I got ghosted. I got rejected. I got lovely rejections. I got, um, just formula rejections. Some came back really fast, like within a week. Some came back, after 2 or 3 months. But I started to get really frustrated with the story because everybody kept saying, "Oh, this is a good story." It was part of my thesis project in 2015 when I graduated. And so, like 2 years after I had written the story, it still wasn't published. And I kept submitting it after I graduated from grad school. I, I just kept thinking, like, this is a great story. Why can't it find a home? And finally, in 2016, when I was in the middle of moving, actually, and I just wanted to take my mind off of moving, I decided that I would submit the story to a place that I hadn't really heard of, but I kind of glanced through some of the things they published, and I thought, okay, you know what? This seems like a decent place. So I submitted it. This was in September of 2016. In November of 2016, about 2 months later, I got an email from this place and they said that I had made it into consideration. Now, I didn't read it too closely because usually when you get what do you call it? When you get some kind of communication from a magazine, it's either an acceptance or it's a rejection. It's not a, well, you're maybe might get published. I had never had that happen to me before. I told you I experienced the gambit with this story. But yes, they said that they were considering it and I didn't read it too closely. I thought they had accepted it. So I wrote back very enthusiastically, "Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm really excited that you love my story." And then of course the next day I promptly got an email saying, "Oh, no. No, no, no. We're considering you. You're not actually accepted." Okay, thank you very much. And I just forgot about the story. It was still technically under consideration, but I had a bunch of other stuff going on at the time. I had moved in with my parents to save some money so that I could pay off my debt and save up for my first place, this place actually. And I was just busy. I was busy working. For the first time ever, my job offered overtime, and I was like, "Yes, I will do it. I will do it." So I was working through the Christmas season, and I was trying to pay off debt. I was just not thinking about the story, whether they wanted it or not. I was like, well, they'll make a decision soon. Yeah, soon was a full 365 days. Yeah. From when they contacted me and said it was in consideration to when I actually got accepted by that place was a year. A year it sat with them. but I just didn't think about it. I had plenty of other stories that I could submit. I wrote a new short story, which actually just got published about 6 months ago in October of 2024, The Fire. So, and actually, I made the first journey of a story was that story. So, there you go. But, but yeah, it took them a year to make up the decision. But when they did, and they said, "We're gonna take it. We're gonna take it. Congratulations." All my enthusiasm was just kind of okay. Thank you. Yay. I had like no enthusiasm. I was happy that the story was published. I was proud that the story was published because I really loved it. I really thought it was a beautiful story. And it's probably one of my favorite stories that I've written because it just came together so well. But the thrill of getting accepted had just kind of like worn off on me. So when it did get published, which was in February of 2018, I was happy. I was excited. I shared it, the links and everything, but it didn't really feel like it was life or death anymore. I kind of felt like, okay, this is the end for this story. Kind of. Kind of. But that was okay. Uh, the story was published about 5 years after I wrote it. And I was very pleased that it had been published. Like I said, this was the first time that a stranger that I had never met offered to publish me. So that was in of itself a great step forward for me. But I also sort of took the mystique out of getting published. It didn't seem so life changing anymore. It was just one more thing that happened with this story. And, I submitted 14 different places. So I had 13 rejections, one acceptance. And it took, like I said, about 5 years for the story to be published. And I think that that was good for me. I think it was good for me because it took sort of the mystique of publishing. Don't get me wrong, I'm still very happy when my stories get published. I'm very happy to get acceptances. I'm still very excited to um to see my work out there in the world. But I also don't hold it as the end all be all. This will change my life. I think that it is a series of things that change your life. And this was just one more step in that direction. So, some stories, they come to me fully formed. I know exactly what happens, the beginning, the middle, the end. I know everything. Some stories come to me and they're an idea. Future Virtual Love was an idea that I had. Like I said, Stranger in a Strange Land, sort of that vibe going on. And writing those full three different parts, but realizing that it was really just the first part that was, worth publishing or that was going to work for publishing. Because I think the other two parts were still pretty good, but uh, word count wise, it was smarter to just publish that first part. That's something that I just had to learn. That's something that I had to figure out as I move through my career. When is something too much? When is something not enough? Um, will this hinder this work? Will this enhance this work? And all that comes with experience. So that's the story of how Future Virtual Love came to be from inception to publication. I hope this was helpful. I hope was inspiring. I hope you all are writing amazing things. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all on the next video.